Visit which.co.uk.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe for this Thursday, the 31st of October in London, coming up this hour.
Fiat Chrysler and Peugeot agree to work towards a 50-50 combination. John Elkann will be chairman and Carlos Tavares CEO on the joint company.
Change of language. The Fed signals it's time for a pause as it cuts rates for a third time in a row. Jay Powell says monetary policy is in a good place. Meanwhile, the BOJ tweaks its guidance to allow for swift easing.
Hong Kong is expected to slip into economic recession later today, and Russia tightens its grip over natural gas supplies in Western Europe. I'm Leanne Gerrans with World News.
And the earnings deluge continues. Shell's third quarter numbers beat, but risk to completing the buyback program on time will be a big concern to investors. And BNP Paribas posts a huge 35% rise in FICC revenue.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, on DAB Digital Radio London, Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington DC, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM Channel 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning from London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Naira Chahij. Good morning, everyone. It's coming up to 8:01 a.m. in London, 9:01 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Lots of corporate news to get to, Caroline, but we've got to take a moment just to reflect on the Fed. That sentence being taken out that they will act as appropriate to sustain the expansion. Powell basically signalling a pause, but the market not necessarily buying it, certainly not on the long end.
No, exactly. So we did see yields on the 10-year drop 7 basis points yesterday. Also, lots of earnings. BNP Paribas really outperforming when it comes to FICC trading, surging 35% from a year earlier, following what seems to be a trend in Europe.
Yeah, and interestingly as well, the big deal that we were anticipating between Fiat Chrysler and Peugeot, we did get confirmation of them pursuing that today, planning on a 50-50 combination. So another big corporate story out there to discuss. And we carried on with the oil earnings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Halloween costume, Nora?
With the time that we go to bed to wake up at 3 a.m., I feel we don't really have an opportunity to get dressed for Halloween. You know, okay. I'm scary enough, I'll just go as myself.
Excellent. Take us through the data on that note.
Right, let's pick up there then and take a look at European equities. We're 2 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe. The S&P 500 hit a record yesterday following the Fed and Powell's news conference. Muted session in Europe on a headline level. The Stock 600 goes nowhere. We're dead flat at the moment for a second day. Below the surface, you're seeing financial services, utilities and healthcare outperform. Car makers and oil and gas underperform. Looking at regional equity benchmarks, the FTSE 100 is down 0.2%. The CAC 40 and the DAX edge into the green. The IBEX is flat. The FTSE MIB up 0.1%. Hitting a record on the S&P 500. It looks like we may hold that today, but we're really not getting a lot of direction from S&P futures. They're flat along with Dow futures. NASDAQ futures pushing higher up 0.2%. Of course, Apple's numbers might have, and outlook might have something to do with that. If we take a look at the 10-year Treasury yield, so yes, dropping several basis points yesterday, outperforming the shorter end. So we've seen some curve flattening on the 2s, 10s for the past few days. The 10-year yield is steady now on a 1.77 handle. Yields dropping in Europe. The 10-year bund yield down 4 basis points, -39. The 10-year gilt yield also dropping 4 basis points to 65 basis points. It's interesting because the other dynamics in the markets is that we got more signs of weaker manufacturing in China. But then we also got a headline that we're going to see talks between the US and China on the phone. So is the market okay with the China data as long as trade talks seem positive? Oil on the front foot. WTI up 0.5%, 55.34. Brent at 60.96, up 0.6%. Caroline.
Yeah, and a bit of breaking news for you. The third quarter GDP number from Spain has come in, an expansion of 0.4%. So that is matching the median estimate of 0.4% growth in Spain. We get the Eurozone GDP data at 10 a.m. this morning. But let's delve into what stocks to watch too. Bloomberg's Kit Rees joins me in the London studio this morning. Interesting that a red headline has just dropped on Air France KLM, down the most since February after trimming their outlook. So that's one stock of interest. But Nera also mentioned the Fiat PSA tie-up group. a merger? Is it exactly a merger? It does seem close to a merger, doesn't it? 50-50. What's going on now?
Yes, so it looks like Europe might be getting a new auto giant, which is going to pose a challenge to Volkswagen. So Fiat and PSA Group, which makes Peugeot and Citroën cars, have agreed to combine. And this would make one of the world's biggest automakers with a combined market value of about $50 billion. So if we look at the shares, Peugeot trading down more than 8% there. Fiat, I don't think it's actually open yet. But yeah, I'm sure we'll see some reaction there for sure. But again, it shows the pressure that car makers have been under, and perhaps they're thinking better to share resources and, go forward together.
Yeah, the cost of electrification and so on. What about Royal Dutch Shell earnings? A lot of people were worried about the lower oil and gas prices, but some resilience from the oil majors.
Yes, I mean, the Royal Dutch Shell, its profit has beaten estimates, so that's a good thing. But I guess investors have been focusing on the company's warning that buybacks might be going forward at a slower pace. So if we have a look, shares are down 1.5% at the bottom of the oil and gas index there. So again, similar to what happened with BP earlier in the week, it posted better than expected earnings, but there was no dividend increase. So a bit of disappointment there today.
Okay, and given Apple and Samsung results, we've been watching Apple suppliers. What can you tell us about those?
So it looks like a mixed start of the day for Apple suppliers. They're roughly flat. So we've got AMS flat, Infineon slightly lower there. There were good results from Apple and Samsung. Both beat estimates there. And Apple is projecting holiday sales, which topped analyst estimates. So this should be a positive for the chip companies, but they have run up quite far this year in terms of their share price. So maybe people wanted just to see a little bit more.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so much, Bloomberg's Kit Rees, for joining us in the London studio with all the stocks to watch.
And let's just add a little bit more colour to those corporate stories that we were just running through. So in terms of Fiat and Chrysler, so the boards of PSA and Fiat Chrysler have approved a preliminary tie-up plan. Shareholders of each would own 50% of the combined entity. Fiat investors would get a dividend of 5.5 billion euros, while PSA would distribute its 46% stake in auto parts maker Faurecia to investors. The deal, as Kit was saying, would create a European powerhouse to rival Volkswagen, looking at a combined market value of about $50 billion. Cost savings from the deal without plant closures are projected to be about 3.7 billion euros. And in terms of the 11-member board of the new group, it'll have 6 members from PSA, including CEO Carlos Tavares, who'll remain CEO for 5 years, and 5 from Fiat Chrysler. Fiat chairman John Elkann stays in that role. It's unclear what role Fiat CEO Mike Manley will hold.
Indeed, interesting. Meanwhile, bank earnings, BNP Paribas posted a third quarter gain as its fixed income trading business boosted that. The French bank outshined its Wall Street and European peers. At the same time, BNP is slashing costs. It shut a proprietary trading unit and exited US commodity derivatives. In terms of where we're trading at the moment, BNP Paribas is gaining, currently up by 0.5%. We gained as much as 0.9% this morning.
And the CFO Lars Machenil saying in a Bloomberg interview that the bank is taking market share. We've also got to check actually on Fiat Chrysler shares, Caroline.
Yes,
they're getting going now. So they are higher, almost 9% higher if we take a look at Fiat Chrysler on the news of the merger. But then turning back to oil majors, Shell warning that returns to investors may be less generous than they'd hoped. It's flagging risks from completing its share buyback on time. But the oil giant continued the industry trend of comfortably beating profit estimates. Net income for the third quarter was well above even the highest estimate.
Also, let's take you to yesterday's action then. The Fed cutting the benchmark interest rate in the US for a third time, as expected, by a quarter point. And Fed Chairman Jay Powell strongly suggesting that that's it.
The policy adjustments we've made to date will continue to provide significant support for the economy. Since monetary policy operates with a lag, the full effects of these adjustments on economic growth, the job market, and inflation will be realized over time. We see the current stance of monetary policy as likely to remain appropriate.
Now, the phrase that people have been picking out is Powell saying that the economy is in a good place. And although manufacturing is in the doldrums, largely because of the president's trade war with China, Powell saying that there are some signs that the headwinds may be easing. Investors have trimmed bets on more easing this year from the Fed. Markets now pricing in another reduction, not until well into 2020.
The Bank of Japan, meanwhile, strengthening its policy pledge on interest rates. At the same time, the central bank left its main policy tools unchanged. The BOJ is judging that market conditions, prices and the economy are sufficiently resilient with the current stimulus. We did also, of course, hear from Haruhiko Kuroda, the BOJ governor, and there's a great TLIV blog where you can catch up on everything and follow it. But he did say the BOJ has room to lower negative rates.
Yeah, exactly. Meanwhile, in China, the manufacturing sector dropped in October to the lowest level since February. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more now from Hong Kong.
The official PMI fell to 49.3, worse than the 49.8 in a Bloomberg survey. Non-manufacturing also lower than forecast at 52.8. It's certainly disappointing after Japanese and South Korean industrial output had rebounded more than expected in recent months. For China, though, it was a bruising third quarter. Hopes were hanging on a confidence boost from a looming deal with the United States and also after months of government stimulus. About the only silver lining was what Bloomberg Economics said, that the drop didn't go beyond a seasonal dip, suggesting there's been no dramatic loss of growth momentum. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And that data comes as plans to sign the first installment of a US-China trade accord next month were thrown into question after Chile cancelled the APEC summit. But the Trump administration insisted that it would continue to press to finalize the Phase 1 agreement in the coming weeks. And China's Ministry of Commerce released a statement earlier this morning saying that top trade negotiators from the US and China will hold a call on Friday. And in terms of the impact of trade as well on corporate earnings, Caroline, we were saying at the top of the hour that Air France is down the most since February, down some 6% after trimming its outlook. Well, the third quarter earnings fell on lower demand for cargo transport. That was one of the reasons. There was also a reduction in lucrative last-minute passenger bookings. But the CFO was warning that trade tensions are weighing on those cargo operations.
That's an interesting line. Meanwhile, here in the UK, the House of Lords has agreed the legislation for the UK's early general election. As Bloomberg Westminster's Ewan Potts reports, campaigning is already getting underway.
They're calling it the Christmas election. 6 weeks from today, Britain heads to the polls again. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn will today kick off his campaign attacking what he calls the UK's corrupt system. The opposition leader will deliver his first speech of the campaign with an attack on billionaires, saying this election is a once-in-a-generation chance to transform the country. He'll also reiterate Labour's plans to nationalise rail, mail and water companies. Conservative Party Chairman James Cleverly says a vote for Corbyn is a vote for more delay and uncertainty on Brexit. Plenty more of this to come. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And let's get to the world news now with Leanne Gerrans. Hi, Leanne.
Good morning, Naira. Starting in Hong Kong, the government will release data today expected to confirm what retailers, hotel operators and residents know all too well, that the economy has slipped into recession after nearly 5 months of increasingly violent protests. Bloomberg's Eric Lam reports.
Third quarter GDP figures are expected to show a 0.6% retreat after a 0.4% contraction in the second quarter. That would put Hong Kong into its first recession since the global financial crisis. The debate now is on just how long this downturn will last. While there are some glimmers of stabilization in recent data, there are also fears the US-China trade war and demonstrations have done lasting damage. In Hong Kong, Eric Lam, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Meanwhile, HSBC lowered its Hong Kong prime lending rate for the first time, and that's in 11 years. Russia's got a major boost from an unlikely source, Denmark. The nation is letting the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline pass through its territory. It'll help Moscow tighten its grip on natural gas supplies in Western Europe. Danish approval was the last permit needed for the $11 billion project. The pipeline has drawn the threat of sanctions from the US. The odds of a December general election in Japan have fallen after the resignation of a second cabinet minister in the space of a week. Bloomberg's Isabel Reynolds has the details. We don't have that sound at the moment, but we'll just move on. And now to the 1MDB scandal. And the US Justice Secretary has struck a deal with fugitive financier Joe Low. It will recoup almost $1 billion looted from the Malaysian investment fund. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok, on Twitter. I'm Leanne Gerrans and this is Bloomberg.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Inovalon is a leading provider of cloud-based platforms empowering data-driven healthcare. Leveraging deep connectivity, the data of billions of medical events, and advanced analytics, Inovalon empowers the achievement of improved clinical outcomes and financial performance for thousands of health insurance companies, hospitals, doctors, pharmacies, and pharmaceutical companies, and the millions of patients they serve every day. Inovalon. Data has a story to tell. We give it a voice. Learn more at Inovalon.com.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Manus Crenny.
We've got a great guest for you now. It is Martin Gilbert, Vice Chairman of Standard Life Aberdeen. I was looking at the emerging market currency flow, and it's pretty clear if the Fed is on pause, it sets up EM on one side, let's say, for a good bid. But you've also got the China slowdown to contend with. What are you seeing in terms of the flow into some of the EM space that you look after at the moment of the company?
The fund that's getting the most flows is the China A-share fund at the moment. We're fortunate enough to have one of the biggest in the world, and we're seeing a large percentage of the flows into that fund. As I've said to you before, I think the China A-share market's very interesting. There's some very good companies there, good quality businesses, and we like a lot of the companies there. So we're certainly seeing flows into that fund at the moment. And I think as for China, we don't really foresee a huge slowdown there. I think the domestic market is holding up growth there. And I think it shows the merit of having switched the economy more towards internal growth rather than export-led growth.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Sandra Kilhoff. Time for a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now over to the First Word breaking news desk in Berlin. For today's morning call, here's Richard Jones.
Good morning, Sandra. Equity markets are mostly higher in reaction to the Fed rate cut and the BOJ planning to keep rates low. The Nikkei, Hang Seng, and Kospi all trade higher, with the Shanghai Composite lower after the disappointing PMI readings in China. U.S. equity futures are up slightly after yesterday's higher close. For European equities, we've had a bit of a mixed open, with the Eurostoxx 50 and DAX trading slightly higher, while the CAC 40 and FTSE both trade lower. Looking at the sector breakdown in Europe, gains are being led by utilities and real estate, with oil and gas and autos the notable underperformers. Turning to bond markets, the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield is steady at 1.77% after dropping 6 basis points yesterday, with the 10-year German bond yield trading 4 basis points lower at minus 0.39%. The Bloomberg Dollar Index is down about 0.2, with the greenback lower against most G10 currencies. The New Zealand dollar is leading the gains. In terms of data today, German retail sales came in broadly in line with consensus. French CPI was lower than expected, and Spain GDP was in line with expectations. We look ahead to Euro area GDP and CPI this morning, and also hear from the S&B's Jordan this afternoon. That's it from me. For more macro breaking news, it's SQUA Go on the Bloomberg Terminal. Sandra?
Thanks, Richard. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. A fire on a train in Pakistan has killed at least 62 people. It was caused by a gas stove which passengers were using to cook breakfast on. Many others are now in a critical condition. The flames destroyed 3 of the train's carriages in the south of the Punjab province. Calls are mounting for Lebanon to impose capital controls after 2 weeks of nationwide protests. It's thought formal restrictions on the movement of money would help to defend the country's dollar peg and prevent a run on banks when they reopen on Friday. Banks have been getting calls from clients asking to move their money abroad as soon as lenders resume operations. And in light of Halloween, it appears many cat and dog owners think their pets have paranormal powers, with almost 2/3 claiming their furry friends have seen a ghost. Nearly 9 in 10 think animals can see things they can't, according to the Blue Cross Animal Charity. Its survey, released on Halloween, which is of course today, found some reckoned it saved them from a paranormal presence. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok and Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
Leanne, thank you so much. I fully believe that, especially if you've got a cat.
Oh, I fully believe that my dogs have seen ghosts. Matt Miller also said that earlier. He said Steve also sees ghosts. I think we all believe it.
Yeah. Right, let's turn back to central banks. Thank you, Leanne Gerrans, with the world news. And we've been digesting the Fed's 3 and potentially done cut last night. And just this morning, we heard from the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, strengthening its policy pledge on interest rates while leaving its main policy tools untouched. According to our next guest, Colin Asher, Governor Kuroda is left with few tools in his policy belt should economic conditions worsen. Welcome to the show, Colin. Great to have you with us this morning. We heard from Haruhiko Kuroda saying the BOJ has room to lower negative rates. In fact, they've got more room than the ECB. Do they?
I think that's quite a difficult question. I think for both banks, they're pretty near the low end of the range. Yeah. I think it was interesting that in the wake of the BOJ decision this morning, the BOJ Topics Bank Index rallied, came off the lows. And I think that certainly suggests that if you're going to go deeper into negative rates, it's going to be bad for the banks, bad for credit to the economy. And I think for the Bank of Japan, they're really not far away from that reversal rate below which you go and it becomes counterproductive.
Okay. JGBs didn't move that much, though, on the news this morning, which I thought was interesting. I mean, as of course it's Mario Draghi's last day at the ECB today, I mean, what lessons for Christine Lagarde from the BOJ for here in Europe? And are there any other policy tools for Japan?
I think, if looking forward, very big picture, very long term, probably the BOJ's main role will potentially be supporting fiscal policy if and when the government decide to go for something more like helicopter money or modern monetary theory in the long term down the road. I think there's very little demand for that at the moment, although you might argue that already the budget deficit is very large and it's being, government spending is very heavily supported by the Bank of Japan with very easy policy. And indeed, the government is issuing at negative rates.
Yeah, so the fiscal theme key for Japan as well as it is globally, Colin. But in terms of the monetary tools, so I suppose one takeaway that some people are taking from the guidance today and the important change to forward guidance is that a rate cut is on the cards. I know that you think there are limits to what the BOJ can do, but even if there are limits, do you think a rate cut is on the cards in the near future?
I think it's possible. I think one of the reasons they didn't, obviously they produced a whole series of analysis alongside the decision. They published like a 25-page PDF suggesting that, looking at their assessment of price momentum, and generally the assessment is it's moving sideways. I mean, obviously Q4 GDP is likely to be slightly negative because of the consumption tax hike. We had quite decent data out today. Consumer confidence bounced. Industrial production was reasonably firm. The forward-looking estimates of production were also not bad, suggesting Q4 is probably not going to be it's not going to be a shocker. It'll probably be negative. Q3 will go up, Q4 will go down. But it all looks like it's slightly less of a big move than the previous consumption tax hike. And in this sense, the BOJ's view is the output gap will remain positive. The momentum might ease a little bit in the fourth quarter, but generally speaking, that's still trending sideways. And as long as that momentum isn't lost, then I think that then they could argue they don't need to cut rates. And the other thing I think is looking at financial markets with dollar yen up here. I mean, I think it's always interesting before you go into the BOJ meeting, you have the regional governors meeting. And the regional governor of Osaka and Nagoya if the currency is a problem, you always hear about it at that meeting. It didn't come up. I didn't see any press interviews of either of them. So clearly the corporate sector is reasonably happy with the currency. So there's no real pressure from the currency. The topics is at new highs for the year. Again, so the financial markets are not really pushing him for a cut, and I think that's one of the reasons why they were happy to say, this time round we're happy to pass.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And just very briefly on the Fed, obviously, are we basically in now a global pause when it comes to easing, given that the Fed, at least signalling to some that they'll stop with this 3 rate cuts?
Yeah, I think for the Fed, I watched the press conference yesterday evening, and I think the takeaway for me was that the bar to higher rates is pretty high. Especially I think they'll need to see the whites of the eyes on inflation before they move. They're certainly concerned that the US may slip into the sort of situation that the Europe and Japan find itself in, and they're very concerned about declining inflation expectations. Yeah. And in that sense, I think the next move is obviously lower for the US.
Right, the bar to higher rate. That quote seemed to be what drove the S&P 500 to a record as well. Great to have you with us, Colin Asher from Mizuho Bank. This is Bloomberg.
With a Bloomberg Business of Sports report, I'm Michael Barr. The NCAA says it will allow student athletes to profit off their name, images, and likeness eventually. UCLA gymnast Caitlin Ohashi on ABC.
There's really nothing you have the right to do in NCAA. So this just allows us to open doors and start careers ahead of time before the 4 years are up.
Gene Smith is the athletic director at Ohio State University.
Hopefully there's rational, reasonable, and prudent decisions that are made that look at what we do, understand that we're the practitioners, we live in this space, and allow us to do our work. Obviously, we can't influence what others think in that regard, but hopefully they'll watch us and give us time to do our work and then evaluate.
The NCAA board says while students should be able to make money from their image and name, they cannot get paid for playing college sports. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports report. I'm Michael Barr. In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
In today's volatile markets, investors need resilient portfolios to help handle the pressure. Through decades of expansions and recessions and changing interest rates, clients have turned to PIMCO to help them stay on course, no matter what course markets take. PIMCO, active fixed income solutions that aim to give investors an edge. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Investing in the bond market is subject to risks. Consult your investment professional prior to making an investment decision.
We just got back from a beautiful city break in Bath. Midweek is the perfect time to beat the crowds. Just an hour and a half by train from London. It was so relaxing. We headed straight for Bath Christmas Market. Oh, I can still smell the roasted chestnuts and mulled wine from the chalets. Next, we donned our skates for Bath on Ice. I'm a natural. Didn't have to hold on to anything or anyone. There's so much to do in Bath. I'm already planning my next trip.
Discover the magic of Bath this Christmas. Plan ahead at visitbath.co.uk/Christmas.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Just because you travel doesn't mean you can't keep your routine. The more obstacles travel puts between us and our well-being, the more we strive to eat well. At Westin Hotels and Resorts, we're focused on empowering your well-being. With Westin Fresh by the Juicery, you can stay revitalized with a fresh assortment of juices and smoothies. And start the day right. Don't leave your well-being behind. We give you the choice to get up or to rise. Search Westin online to find out more. Westin, let's rise.
I tell you what used to be fair, lunch.
Used to walk past pubs and just see people laughing and merriment. What happened to those cheery days? I tell you what happened to them. It's been replaced by a pint glass sitting by a computer full of condiments, plastic cutlery, and a pair of chopsticks you use for fishing the noodles out your keyboard. It's just not fair.
At TalkTalk, fairness is important. That's why, unlike some other providers, we offer fixed price plans on our fibre broadband for the entire length of your contract. Search TalkTalk Fibre. Fairer broadband for everyone.
There's something for everybody this Halloween at Aldi. Dead good sweets, decorations, face paints. Be afraid. Be very afraid to miss out on these shockingly low prices. In store now. Everybody get to Aldi for an amazing Halloween.
Halloween's back, alright. The thing that I would say to anybody that was thinking about a job in social care is go for it. I'm Georgia. I love social care because you never know what each day will bring.
Georgia's very helpful. It's just nice to have her around.
It's emotional sometimes, highs and lows, but no 2 days are the same. I love the work, yeah. It makes me feel really good as a person. We make people smile every day.
If you want to make a difference to your life, care for someone else's, visit everydaysdifferent.com to find jobs in adult social care.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB Digital Radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
8:30 a.m. in London, 9:30 if you're listening in Paris, Frankfurt or Brussels. Good morning, everyone. I'm Neera Chahich.
And I'm Caroline Hebke. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, where we check the markets for you every 15 minutes.
Yep, and 30 minutes into the equity market open here in Europe, we're seeing the Stock 600 edge into positive territory, up almost 0.2% after a bit of a slow day yesterday. With industry groups, you're seeing utilities and food and beverage outperform to the upside, oil and gas and car makers underperforming to the downside, along with banks, which is interesting given some of the corporate news we've had out this morning. Looking at regional equity benchmarks, FTSE 100 is down 0.2%. The CAC 40 is flat. So is the DAX. The IBEX edges into the red. The FTSE MIB slightly in the green, up some 0.4%. Now, in terms of some of the individual stock movers and some of the corporate stories that we're watching, BNP Paribas really hitting it out of the park with fixed income trading. But if we take a look at the stock right now, investors perhaps a little bit overwhelmed to some degree as we're actually down 0.2% on that stock. We'll get on to some of the other earnings in a moment, like Shell, for example, and also, of course, news of the potential tie-up between Fiat Chrysler and PSA, also giving quite a push to some of those stocks. We've seen Fiat Chrysler move higher. It's the best performer on the Stock 600, up almost 9% right now. Then taking a look, also Air France, by the way, one of the worst performers, down 5%. It cited trade tensions as one of the things impacting their outlook as well. Taking a look at US futures, the S&P 500 got to a record yesterday following the Fed and Powell's press conference. We don't see a lot of direction in S&P 500 E-minis. They're flat. Dow futures edge up. NASDAQ futures lead a little, up 0.2%. The news out of Apple might have something to do with that. The 10-year Treasury yield is steady after dropping several basis points yesterday. Jerome Powell might have signaled the Fed is on pause. The long end certainly didn't buy it. 177 is where we are right now. We've also seen some curve flattening on the 2s, 10s. Yields falling in Europe. The 10-year Bund yield down 4 basis points to negative 39. The 10-year gilt yield down 3 basis points to a 65 handle. Caroline.
Yeah, breaking news on the Bloomberg terminal this morning. Hong Kong, the GDP figure for the third quarter, a drop, down 3.2% quarter on quarter for GDP. So a GDP contraction. The estimate, though, was for a contraction of just 0.6%. So Hong Kong enters a technical recession, the first recession for a decade. So since 2009 for Hong Kong, we were anticipating that, but the figure really is very, very weak quarter on quarter. Also, I just note very briefly, ECB Vice President Luis de Guindos speaking in Bilbao, saying that the risks to the euro area in terms of growth are to the downside, and the ECB policy can't resolve the trade war or Brexit. So those from de Guindos.
Yeah, and on Hong Kong as well, of course, we heard earlier that HSBC lowered its Hong Kong prime lending rate for the first time in 11 years, which really really underscores the economic challenges facing the financial hub. But to get back to our top stories, Caroline, the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates for the third time in a row. The big question, though, is will it now stay on hold? That's the hint from Chairman Jerome Powell. He said that policy is in a good place. Investors trimmed bets on more easing this year. Markets are now not pricing in another reduction until well into 2020. And of course, they removed that key sentence from the statement as well about sustaining the expansion.
Yeah, meanwhile, in top earnings news, a wrap of the tech firms. Apple rose in late trading after results beat across the board despite slowing iPhone sales. The tech giant forecasts a return to growth in the holiday period. Meanwhile, Samsung Electronics also topped profit estimates as smartphones and displays used in iPhones offset weak chips, and Facebook sales rose a better than projected 29%, and earnings per share of $2.12 really crushed consensus on Wall Street.
Shell has warned that returns to investors may be less generous than they'd hoped. It's flagging risks from completing its share buyback on time. But the oil giant continued the industry trend of comfortably beating profit estimates. Net income for the third quarter was well above even the highest estimates. You have a push and pull there, and really the move is to the downside when you look at the share price, down 2.8%. So investors are seeming to take a little bit of fright from the news on the buyback.
Meanwhile, it is a deal that will create one of the world's largest automakers. Rivals Fiat Chrysler and France's PSA Group have unveiled a plan to merge. The two boards agreed to work together on a binding agreement in the next few weeks. We had confirmation this morning. So let's cross over now live to Paris, where Bloomberg's Tara Patel joins us. She leads our EMEA Transport and Industry team. So it looks as if the agreement on a tie-up is there, but will all the stakeholders come on board? I'm thinking the unions and the French government.
Oh, hi. Yes. Good morning. Yes. Well, it looks pretty positive when it comes to the government, the French government in any case, already signaling yesterday that it was very open to this kind of deal. The French government is a big stakeholder in PSA. And today there was a statement from the French finance minister to draw attention to the need for consolidation in the global car industry, which is facing many challenges, such as huge walls of investment needed for electric and self-driving cars.
Tara, great to speak to you this morning. What can we read into the fact that Fiat Chrysler shares are gaining significantly, best performer on the Stock 600, whereas PSA shares are dropping 8%?
Well, analysts are still digesting the news, but what is becoming quite clear is that reaction is that from some analysts is that it's a good deal, but it's a better deal for Fiat, and that Peugeot to get this combination done is paying a pretty hefty premium to be able to take control of Fiat, and is probably assuming more risk in this deal.
Okay. The big challenge, of course, to this, what could be a massive company, will be electrification, right?
That's right. It's electrification. It's self-driving, and on the European in the European market, what is also going to cost car makers a lot is when new rules on emissions come into effect next year.
Tara Patel, great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Tara Patel joining us from Paris. She helps lead our EMEA Transport and Industry team.
So let's get over now to Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans, who's got all the latest in global news. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline. Starting in Hong Kong, the government will release data today expected to confirm what retailers, hotel operators and residents know all too well, that the economy has slipped into recession. That's after nearly 5 months of increasingly violent protests. That would put Hong Kong into the first recession since the global financial crisis. In other news, Russia has got a major boost from an unlikely source, that's Denmark. The nation is letting the controversial Nord Stream 2 pipelines pass through the territory. It'll help Moscow tighten its grip on natural gas supplies in Western Europe. Danish approval was the last permit needed for the $11 billion project. The pipeline has drawn the threat of sanctions from the US. Leaders from some of the world's largest economies are meeting this week, and that's happening in Thailand. Bloomberg's Randy Thangthong Knight reports on the ASEAN summit.
Among their top priorities will be to conclude the negotiations on the world's largest free trade pact. The 16-country bloc includes China, India, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and 10 nations in Southeast Asia, and covers nearly half of the world's population. In Bangkok, Randy Tantong-Knight, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
And climate activists are doing all sorts of things these days. Bloomberg's Richard Weiss says the latest stunt from environmental groups in Germany calls on people to not fly domestically as they seek to ground air travel.
The activists want people to abstain from flying and take trains instead. They seek to keep scheduled flights empty for that week to change people's travel behavior and burn a hole in the pocket of airports and airlines while they're at it. In Frankfurt, Richard Weiss, Bloomberg Daybreak, Europe.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Neyra.
Leanne, thank you so much. Now let's get the morning sport with Pete Fox.
Let them celebrate in D.C. as the Cardiac Nationals do it once again, winning their fourth game of the series on the road to bring home their first World Series. Steven Strasburg was named MVP, finishing the series with 2 wins. An honorable mention to a host of guys, including Anthony Rendon, Howie Kendrick, Juan Soto, and Adam Eaton, all of whom had RBIs in this win. 6-2 the final. From the night on the NBA hardwood, the basketball version of the World Series as the Rockets were in D.C. to take on the Wizards. Clearly, both of these teams had one eye on Minute Maid as the defense was MIA. Rockets winning it in regulation, 159-158, led by James Harden's 59. Celtics post a win over the Bucks. Knicks and Nets both fall. I'm Pete Fox. That's your Bloomberg NBC Sports Update.
So that's the sports roundup. Meanwhile, we did get those Hong Kong figures slipping into a recession, negative 3.2% for third quarter GDP in Hong Kong. So a technical recession there, of course, as we also digest the Fed rate cut and big earnings today.
Yeah, absolutely. So much on the earnings front from BNP Paribas, from Shell, and of course the news of the merger between Fiat Chrysler and Peugeot that they're going to try and pursue. A 50-50 combination is what we're hearing about. The Stock 600 on a headline level, struggling for direction for a second day. We saw a drop in the 10-year yield yesterday as the market didn't seem convinced that the Fed would be on pause. It's now on a 177 handle. This is Bloomberg.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert, filling in for Smokey because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
You knew the risks when you decided to drive drunk. There could be a crash. People could get hurt or killed. But that didn't stop you, did it? You knew you could get arrested. You could incur huge legal expenses, and you could possibly even lose your job. You were well aware of the consequences of driving drunk. But one thing's for sure. You were wrong when you said it was no big deal. Drive sober or get pulled over. This message brought to you by NHTSA.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
It's another Thursday morning. Yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick and witness luscious scenery and calming waves. Fly from London Gatwick to St Lucia with British Airways, with flights and 7 nights hotel from just £739 per person. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun. With British Airways, incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
Cold Thursday mornings like this are cruel. You cough, you splutter, so does your car. Its battery dead, killed by an icy claw. Will anyone stand up to winter? Yes, you. Come to Halfords. We fit new batteries on the spot from just £15, and we're open late 7 days a week. See halfords.com for opening hours. Here in Chiswick. Ready for the cold snap? Ready for anything. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Batteries sold separately. Selected vehicles only in most stores.
I tell you what used to be fair, lunch. Used to walk past pubs and just see people laughing and merriment. What happened to those cheery days? I tell you what happened to them. It's been replaced by a pint glass sitting by a computer full of condiments, plastic cutlery, and a pair of chopsticks you use for fishing the noodles out your keyboard. It's just not fair.
At TalkTalk, fairness is important. That's why, unlike some other providers, we offer fixed price plans on our fibre broadband for the entire length of your contract. Search TalkTalk Fibre. Fairer broadband for everyone.
We've been together 3 years. We both love travel, and luckily we've got the same taste in music. Next year, we're planning a big road trip, and my wife's coming too. It'll be nice. The three of us don't do enough together. We know how much your Mini means to you. That's why Mini Service offers an array of convenient options and allows you to book online anytime at mini.co.uk. Because we love your Mini almost as much as you do. Search Mini Service. Who's in? T's and C's apply, subject to availability, participating retailers only.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
Hey, it's me again, the TV. Since my family gave me Now TV, there's no more endlessly searching for something they want to watch, because now I don't do filler TV, just killer TV. If my family want dramas, I've got Emmy-winning shows. Oh, I know, so fancy. Football? How about the Premier League? Or how about documentaries? I've got ones about space, sharks, or superstars. Now they can watch whatever they're in the mood for.
What's your TV got for you tonight? Now TV. 18 plus, month passes auto-renew, terms apply.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg European headquarters in London, I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now, it's a bit of a mixed trading day here in Europe. The Stock 600 and the DAX both currently flat. The CAC 40 down 0.1%. The FTSE down 0.3%. It all follows a fairly mixed trading day in Asia as well. The Hang Seng still trading there, currently up 0.9%. US futures, meanwhile, pointing slightly higher following last night's Fed decision. Of course, it was a somewhat hawkish rate cut with the Fed Fed saying it's 3 and done. Now, it's also another big earnings today. I'm keeping an eye on banks with the likes of BNP Paribas and BBVA both moving lower despite beating earnings estimates. Lloyds, however, down more than 2% here in London after PPI claims almost wiped out profit. On the other end, Fiat Chrysler rallying almost 10% after the Fiat and PSA boards approved the merger with Peugeot. So that had quite a big stock mover today. Continued bull flattening when it comes to treasuries. The 10-year yield currently down a basis point at 1.77%. 10-year Bund yields sliding 4 basis points to negative 39. Gilt yields also moving lower, currently at 64 basis points. In currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index lower by 0.2%. The yen, meanwhile, gaining to 108.6 against the greenback. The offshore yuan holding around 7.04, really shrugging off that poor manufacturing PMI data out this morning. The pound and the euro, meanwhile, bid today. UK election campaigning, of course, getting underway. Cable now at 129. Finally, oil getting a bit of a respite. WTI up 0.7% at $55 a barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Gerrans with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. A fire on a train in Pakistan has killed at least 62 people. It was caused by a gas stove which passengers were using to cook breakfast. Many others are now in a critical condition. The flames destroyed 3 of the train carriages in the south of the Punjab province. House committees have asked former National Security Advisor John Bolton to testify in the impeachment inquiry. Bolton was ousted from the White House last month. He had been requested to appear but has not been subpoenaed. Bolton would be a key witness to events in the White House dealing with Ukraine. And finally, Nightmare on Downing Street, a children's book aimed at explaining Brexit to kids, goes on sale. That's happening tonight after a study found that a third of UK parents wouldn't be able to. I Want to Leave This book uses colourful animals to depict some of the country's top political figures. It'll be released at 11 p.m. tonight, the time the UK was actually due to leave the EU before, of course, another Brexit extension was granted. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Naira.
I think we could all benefit from reading that book, don't you, Caroline? I could, anyway.
Yeah, a simplified version of what Brexit is all about. But I like the fact that they're all different animals.
They are. So I've had a look at some of the animals, which is quite interesting. So David Cameron appears in the book as a pig named Percy Hogtrotter, while Theresa May is depicted as a hamster and Boris Johnson as a Highland cow.
Okay, I shall say nothing on that. Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans, there with the World News. Coming up next, our colleagues in the United States are getting ready for Bloomberg Daybreak, of course, this Halloween. Very good morning to Nathan Hager, who joins me. What's ahead for you, Nathan?
I thought we were going to be talking about Brexit, but that was days ago that the extension was agreed to, and so now we're going to be focused on the Fed, of course. The Federal Reserve delivered that third rate cut, and Chairman Jerome Powell is hinting pretty strongly this could be 3 and out, but we do have headwinds, of course, not the least of which is trade uncertainty and Hong Kong now in technical recession. We'll ask Mizuho chief U.S. economist Stephen Rasciuto where he sits on the question of further easing. Plus, earnings continue to be in focus. Some strong results from some FANG names in the third quarter. And we're going to dig into Apple's results this morning with Dan Ives of Wedbush Securities. And, of course, this will be a historic day in Washington as the House votes to lay out the ground rules for impeachment. All that and more coming up with me and Karen Moscow on Bloomberg Daybreak. Happy Halloween, Caroline and Naira.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Bloomberg Daybreak is up next. Or if you're listening on London DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance.
Let's pick up now with Bob Parker, Investment Committee member at Quilvest, who's with us in the London studio as our guest for the rest of the show. Bob, welcome. Great to have you on the show. Happy Halloween.
Thank you.
Let's kick off with the Fed then before we get on to earnings season. It was interesting because Powell and the statements seem to signal a pause, but you get a sense from the bond markets that investors didn't really buy it. The S&P 500 hit a record, presumably on the fact they said there's a high bar for raising rates, and a subdued VIX. Is there potential for dislocation in markets based on expectations that the Fed may continue to be dovish?
I think the first point to make is that we've seen a big shift in futures markets over the last month to 6 weeks. And whereas, let's say 2 months ago, the futures markets were discounting a high probability that the Fed would cut again in December, now the futures markets are saying, actually, the chance of a Fed cut after the cut that we had yesterday is now very low. So the futures markets are actually very much in sync with what Jay Powell said, i.e. that the Fed is on pause for the foreseeable future. Now, if we look into the first half of 2020, let's assume that US growth is moderate at around 2%. Some people are discussing, whether the US is having a soft landing, and if you define that as 2%, the answer is yes. Let's assume that inflation stays subdued at under 2%. Then, frankly, there's really no need for the Fed to change rates from the current level of 1.5% to 1.75% on the funds rate. So that, in turn, means the bond yields are probably fairly anchored where they are today. So, I would argue that the 10-year Treasury yield currently just under 1.8%. We may drift higher as investors shift back into global equity markets. But, are we going to break through 2% over the next 3 to 6 months again on the 10-year Treasury? Unlikely. And that, in turn, I actually think will underpin global equity markets.
Okay. That is interesting. So not in December, but then I suppose it's also about the US consumer. The US consumer's holding up. Is that also the read across? Because we had the 1.9% GDP figure. So you're saying that the US remains fairly solid. I mean, looking at past easing cycles, though, we were in a stronger place when the Fed stopped the easing. So is that because of long-term trend growth or what?
I think, let's be clear, the probability over the next 1 and 2 years of the Fed raising interest rates is probably close to zero. My central case is that probably in the first half of next year, as an insurance policy, to use their words, they probably cut rates one more time. But are we going to get a significant further cut in the Fed funds rate over the next year? I think that's very unlikely. And I think the central case has to be fairly consistent with what Jay Powell has said. We're on pause for the moment. So that means that actually bond markets could just drift sideways, but that in turn will encourage investor flows into probably higher dividend yielding equity markets.
Yeah, makes sense. So you believe the Fed is on pause and you think that it's fair to say they have to some extent engineered a soft landing at this point. So with the equity markets, you think high dividend payers is where to look. So give us just a little bit more detail on what you'd like in equity strategy, given that bond markets are not looking that interesting.
Well, I think one feature of the global economy at the moment is that we've had weak manufacturing data, partly because of the trade conflicts. I actually think that if we make some progress, which I think is happening on the US-China trade conflict, then there will be some catch-up effect. So whereas the last 6 months the global economy has been driven by consumption and the service sector, the manufacturing sectors have been depressed. What we could see going into year-end and the beginning of next year is actually some improvement, which is not discounted at all in manufacturing. So therefore markets which are super cheap, I actually think could start to see investor interest. And for example, in Asia, cheap markets like South Korea, which has been hit by not just the US-China trade conflict, but also the conflict with Japan. It's had a number of sectoral issues. It is one of the cheapest markets in the world at the moment.
What about earnings season? We are in the midst of it. BNP Paribas, for example, doing particularly well.
Yes.
European banks actually seem to have fared perhaps not as badly as one might have thought, with perhaps the exception of Deutsche Bank. How do you see earnings season?
Well, obviously Deutsche Bank is an outlier, and you can't take a generalization from Deutsche Bank. But if you actually look at, let's say, the French banks, actually good results driven by Latin American from Santander, and I think the overall picture is that European banks are very cheap if you look at price to book. The earnings were obviously hit very badly last year and the beginning of this year. BNP Paribas, I think, is a very good example of a trend earnings improvement, and I think the message on the European banks is actually ex-Deutsche, the worst is behind us.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, we haven't really seen a positive reaction in BNP Paribas shares this morning. We've also seen Shell's shares drop, but that's not really a surprise, Bob, given the guidance that they've said in terms of perhaps having to walk back plans to buy back $25 billion of shares by the end of next year. Concerned about the potential for dividends from oil majors, briefly?
Companies like Shell are super cash rich, and therefore I think they can probably maintain their dividends. Now, obviously, sectors, whether it's the European banking sector, whether it's the energy sector, both are very much out of favour with investors at the moment. On the oil and energy sector, the general view, I think rightly, is that the trend over the next 2 to 3 years in oil prices is down. Therefore, investors are shying away from that sector.
Okay. Great to have you with us this morning, Bob Parker.
Thank you so much for joining us. And next up, Daybreak with Nathan Hager and Karen Moscow. If you're listening on DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg at Surveillance. This is Bloomberg.
Just because you travel doesn't mean you can't keep your routine. The more obstacles travel puts between us and our well-being, the more we strive to eat well. At Westin Hotels and Resorts, we're focused on empowering your well-being. With Westin Fresh by the Juicery, you can stay revitalized with a fresh assortment of juices and smoothies. And start the day right. Don't leave your well-being behind. We give you the choice to get up or to rise. Search Westin online to find out more. Westin, let's rise.
It's another Thursday morning. Yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick. Experience Mexican culture and relax by the Caribbean Sea. Fly from London Gatwick to Cancun with British Airways from £275 each way based on a return fare. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun. With British Airways, incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
Cold Thursday mornings like this are cruel. You cough, you splutter, so does your car. Its battery dead, killed by an icy claw. Will anyone stand up to winter? Yes, you. Come to Halfords. We fit new batteries on the spot from just £15, and we're open late 7 days a week. See halfords.com for opening hours. Here in Chiswick. Ready for the cold snap? Ready for anything. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Batteries sold separately. Selected vehicles only in most stores.
Digital capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Thursday, October 31st, 2019. Coming up this hour.
Another record high for the S&P 500 as the Fed cuts rates again.
Bond yields in China hit a 5-month high after weak data from the factory sector.
In Europe, Peugeot and Fiat move closer to a merger.
And tech earnings come in strong with beats from Facebook, Apple, and Samsung.
The House votes today on a resolution in the Trump impeachment process. Plus, ex-National Security Advisor John Bolton is asked to testify before the House. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. The Washington Nationals World Series champs. They won Game 7 in Houston. The Knicks, Nets, and Devils all lost.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York. Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 106.1 Boston. Bloomberg 960 San Francisco. Sirius XM 119. And around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. U.S. futures are little change to higher this morning after yesterday's record close for the S&P 500. We're coming up to 501 on Wall Street. And we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are up about 2 points. Dow futures up 27. NASDAQ futures up 18. The DAX in Germany, little changed as well, up about 0.1%. CAC in Paris, little change. FTSE 100 down 0.25%. Nikkei 225 in Japan gained 0.33%. Hang Seng in Hong Kong up 0.9.
0.6%. 10-year Treasury, little change, yield 1.76%. Yield on the 2-year, 1.61%. NYMEX crude oil is up 0.9% or 50 cents at $55.56 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.4% or $6.20 at $15.0280 an ounce. The euro 1.1173 against the dollar. The yen at 108.61. Nathan.
Karen, stocks in the U.S. are at another record high after the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates for the third time this year. Traders now see no additional rate cuts until April. Chairman Jerome Powell won't say it, but he seems to think he's achieved a rare soft landing.
The policy adjustments we've made since last year are providing, and will continue to provide, meaningful support to the economy. We believe that monetary policy is in a good place.
Still, the Fed has little leeway here, and the markets could force their hand before April. That's according to Guggenheim Chief Investment Officer Scott Meinert.
At some point, the market has to get confident that these 3 rate cuts are enough, and it is 1995, it is 1998, it is 1987, that this is enough medicine to solve the problem. So I think they have a short-lived window here before the market forces them to do something again.
To that end, Grant Thornton Chief Economist Diane Swank sees the Fed cutting rates again soon if there's no resolution to the U.S.-China trade war.
A year ago at this time, the Fed was looking at raising rates through 2019, and they had to reverse course. I think we still got more rate cuts in 2020.
Well, right now, Fed funds futures imply a 55% chance of a rate cut in April. Bloomberg customers can see the data by typing WIRP-GO on the terminal.
And there's more insight from the Fed coming tomorrow when we have an exclusive interview with Richard Clarida. Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow sit down for a conversation with the Fed Vice Chairman at 9:30 a.m. Wall Street time, 2 days after the Fed decision and just an hour after the October jobs report. Catch that tomorrow morning on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Overnight in Asia, the Bank of Japan kept policy unchanged but strengthened its wording on interest rates, and that leaves the door open for lower rates. BOJ also dropped its time frame for, quote, keeping rates extremely low until at least spring of next year.
In China, government bond yields are at a 5-month high after a gauge of the country's factory sector dropped to the lowest level since February. We get more from Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis in Hong Kong.
The official PMI fell to 49.3, worse than the 49.8 in a Bloomberg survey. It's certainly disappointing after Japanese and South Korean industrial output had rebounded more than expected in recent months. For China, though, it was a bruising third quarter. Hopes were hanging on a confidence boost from a looming deal with the United States and also after months of government stimulus. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Brian, thank you. And in Hong Kong, it has officially entered a technical recession with third quarter GDP contracting by 3.2%. After nearly 5 months of violent protests, a contraction was expected, but the reading came in far below estimates of minus 0.6%.
In Europe, Fiat, Chrysler, and Peugeot are moving forward with a merger. The automakers have agreed to work toward a 50-50 combination that would have John Elkann of Fiat as chairman and Carlos Tavares of Peugeot as CEO. Here with more from Milan is Bloomberg's Tommaso Ebhardt.
Peugeot is the best performer in Europe, and Fiat has a big issue with this business in Europe. Fiat is bringing to the table its US division, and namely Jeep, which is likely one of the most valuable brands in the globe. Carlos Tavares will drive the bus. John Elkann will be the chairman, and so we can say that Carlos is driving, but he's driving an Elkann's car.
Shares of Fiat Chrysler are gaining for a second day, up 9% in Milan. Peugeot investors seem cool on the deal, though. The stock's down 8% in Paris.
All right, turning to earnings now. Shares of Facebook are up 5% in early trading after results that beat projections. The social network is also forecasting increased sales and steady user growth. We spoke with Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg.
We have now 2.8 billion people, about 2.8 billion using our family of apps, and everything's growing. Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, WhatsApp. And importantly, the Facebook core app is growing, including in the United States.
Worldwide, Facebook's monthly user base grew by 35 million, including 3 million new users in North America.
Shares of Apple up about 2% in the pre-market after earnings topped estimates, and its holiday forecast came in ahead of projections. Bob O'Donnell is chief analyst at Technalysis.
It was interesting, of course, to see what happened with the iPhone numbers, because while we got early signs that iPhone 11 did well, the question mark was how badly were the previous year's models declining before those iPhone 11 numbers hit. Apparently not too badly. They really did what people are expecting, and the quarter forecast looks to be pretty reasonable as well.
Apple's holiday forecast signals solid demand for the iPhone 11, services, and wearables like the Apple Watch and AirPods.
Samsung is also out with results that beat estimates. Net income came in above expectations, while Samsung projects a gradual recovery in the memory chip market next year.
And this headline just crossing the Bloomberg, China is said to doubt the long-term trade deal that's possible with President Trump. It's said to be unwilling to budge on big structural changes, and it's said to demand an end to tariffs for any phase 2 talks. Futures turn lower on those headlines. S&P futures now down 6 points. Dow futures down 29. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thanks for that. It's 5:07 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
The House is set to vote today on guidelines for the impeachment hearings going forward. Bloomberg's Bob Moon reports Democrats say it's a move to make the rules clear and fair.
The Intelligence Committee will lead the inquiry to thoroughly investigate accusations that focus on U.S. intelligence issues. The Republican Senator Lindsey Graham appears not to understand that connection.
I don't know why you pick intel over judiciary. We've never done that before.
Actually, the resolution calls for the Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, and Oversight and Reform panels to provide a report to the Judiciary Committee, which would then recommend whether to proceed with articles of impeachment. Rules Committee Chair Jim McGovern says Democrats are striving to be fair.
No one runs for Congress to impeach a president, but we are here today because the facts compel us to be.
He says Republicans will have equal time for questions, and the president can have his lawyer raise any objections. Bob Moon, Bloomberg Daybreak.
House investigators expect to hear next from the man who until recently was President Donald Trump's top advisor for Russian and European affairs. Tim Morrison had been with the National Security Council until leaving his post the day before his scheduled testimony in the inquiry. Morrison is expected to be asked today to explain that sinking feeling he described to a colleague when Trump demanded that Ukraine investigate Joe Biden and meddling in the 2016 election. Meanwhile, former National Security Advisor John Bolton is not agreeing to a voluntary interview in the impeachment inquiry against President Trump without a subpoena. House committees leading the impeachment investigation asked Bolton to appear behind closed doors next week. South Korea's military says North Korea fired at least one unidentified projectile off its eastern coast today. Japan's Coast Guard separately said that the object was likely a missile. The Washington Nationals have clinched their first World Series title after defeating the Astros in Game 7 last night in Houston. Fans at National Park after the game say this team has fought back all the way.
It's amazing to see the home team drop every game. So we thought it was done, man. So for them to go back all the way to Houston and bring it back home, man, is amazing.
We'll have more on the game and sports later. The California wildfires continue to burn, and firefighters have their hands full dealing with the flames and the high winds fueling them. Global News 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It's 5:09 on Wall Street. Let's get more now on the World Series. In the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, here's John Stashauer.
Nathan, once before there was a World Series champion from Washington. That was 95 years ago. Now there's another.
The kick, and here it comes. Swing and a miss! Swing and a miss! Swing and a miss! And a World Series Game 7 winning Curly W is in the books. The celebration is on. The Washington Nationals are the world champions.
Nationals radio had the call last night from Houston. No team in any sport ever won a championship like the Nats just did. 4 wins all on the road, and no baseball teams had a playoff run like the Nats just had. At one point, they won an unprecedented 8 games in a row, and then they finished winning 8 straight road games. They were in 5 elimination games. They won them all after trailing in all 5. Last night, they had only 1 hit in the first 6 innings, but scored 6 runs on 8 hits over the last 3. They beat the Astros in Game 7, 6-2. Home runs for Anthony Rendon and Howie Kendrick, whose 2-run shot put Washington ahead. Insurance in the 9th on a 2-run hit by Adam Eaton. Max Scherzer went 5 innings. Patrick Corbin the next 3. Steven Strasburg, who won Games 2 and 6, named World Series MVP. Knicks struggled to score in Orlando, shot 38%, lost to the Magic 95-83. Knicks fall to 1-4. The Nets are 1-3, beaten in Brooklyn by Indiana 118 to 108. Kyrie Irving 28 points in the loss. The Warriors are 1-3, lost at home to Phoenix and lost Steph Curry to a broken left hand. Houston 159, Washington 158. James Harden scored 59 points. Kyle Palmieri finished the hat trick scoring with 8 seconds left, but the Devils beaten by Tampa Bay 7-6 in overtime. With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashower. Nathan?
All right, John, and just to reiterate the breaking news that crossed the Bloomberg terminal just moments ago, Chinese officials are casting doubts about reaching a comprehensive long-term trade deal with the U.S., even as they get close to signing a Phase 1 agreement. Sources tell Bloomberg Chinese officials are warning they won't budge on the thorniest issues. They remain concerned about President Trump's impulsive nature. S&P futures turning lower, down now by 6 points. This is Bloomberg.
Why has J.D. Power ranked Commonwealth Financial Network #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms for the 6th straight time? We think it comes down to one thing: you. Because it's your input and feedback that keeps us focused on what's most important to you and your clients, and continually pushes us to be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us #1 in client support, #1 in firm leadership, #1 in operational support, #1 in compensation, #1 in professional development support, and #1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
The lifeblood of tech startups isn't just money. It's executive and technical skills. The kind of skills that companies need to build real products. And the skills that venture capitalist Chris Sugden of Edison Partners sees in the graduates that are coming out of New Jersey Institute of Technology.
The amazing thing about NJIT is their graduates, they have multiple offers on average, not just one. They're coming out with real skill sets that are immediately hireable and available to them. I think we see an understanding by the faculty and administration at NJIT that we've got to train and educate the whole student, not just their, one side of their brain. And I do think that's sort of part of the DNA today. There's practical and there's sort of academia, and merging those two together and understanding that if we're going to have our young people go get great jobs and have great successful careers, they've got to have both sides of their brain activated. And I think we see that with NJIT.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Rich. It's another Thursday morning. Yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick to see spectacular coral reefs and white sand beaches. Fly from London Gatwick to Mauritius with British Airways, with flights and 7 nights hotel from just £949 per person. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun with British Airways. Incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
Cold Thursday mornings like this are cruel. You cough, you splutter, so does your car. Its battery dead, killed by an icy claw. Will anyone stand up to winter? Yes, you. Come to Halfords. We fit new batteries on the spot from just £15, and we're open late 7 days a week. See halfords.com for opening hours. Here in Chiswick. Ready for the cold snap? Ready for anything. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Batteries sold separately. Selected vehicles only in most stores.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Manus Craney.
We've got a great guest for you now. It is Martin Gilbert, Vice Chairman of Standard Life Aberdeen. I was looking at the emerging market currency flow, and it's pretty clear if the Fed is on pause, it sets up EM on one side, let's say, for a good bid, but you've also got the China slowdown to contend with. What are you seeing in terms of the flow into some of the EM space that you look after at the moment of the company?
The fund that the most flows is the China A-share fund at the moment. We're fortunate enough to have one of the biggest in the world, and we're seeing a large percentage of the flows into that fund. as I've said to you before, I think the China A-share market's very interesting. There's some very good companies there, good quality businesses, and we like a lot of the companies there. So we're certainly seeing flows into that fund at the moment. And I think as for China, we don't really foresee a huge slowdown there. I think the domestic market is holding up growth there. And I think it shows the merit of having switched the economy more towards internal growth rather than export-led growth.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Futures turned lower this morning after Chinese officials cast doubts about reaching a comprehensive long-term trade deal with the U.S., even as the two sides get close to signing a Phase 1 agreement. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 7 points this morning. Dow futures down 55. NASDAQ futures down 8.5. The DAX in Germany's down 0.5%. 10-year Treasury up 630 seconds, yield 1.74%. The yield on the 2-year 1.59%. NYMEX crude oil is up 1/3% or 18 cents at $55.25 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.6% or $9.30 at $15.0610 an ounce. The euro 1.1170 against the dollar. British pound 1.2945 and the yen at 108.39. Today we're looking for the weekly report on initial jobless claims out at 8:30 Wall Street time, along with personal income and spending. The Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index is out at 9:45, and another busy morning for corporate earnings. Bristol Myers Squibb and Kraft Heinz among those scheduled to report. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. A former member of the National Security Council is expected to be asked to explain what he meant when he described to a colleague a sinking feeling when President Trump pressured Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and meddling in the 2016 election. Tim Morrison was President Trump's top advisor for Russian and European affairs until he left the NSC a day ahead of his scheduled testimony today in the House impeachment inquiry. Washington Nationals fans have been celebrating after beating the Houston Astros to win the World Series. The Nationals won the deciding Game 7, 6-2. In the NBA, the Knicks and Nets lost. The Celtics won. The Rockets beat the Wizards 159-158 in regulation. The Warriors lost, and even worse, Stephen Curry broke his left hand, be out indefinitely. NHL, the Devils lost. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
My goodness, no one must have missed in that game. That's amazing. Thank you, Michael. We're coming up to 5:20 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. We want to bring in Stephen Rasciuto, Chief U.S. Economist at Mizuho Securities. Fascinating this morning, Stephen, just as we got word from the Federal Reserve hinting that they might be through and done when it comes to rate cuts, now we get another reminder of the potential headwind of U.S.-China trade uncertainty with this report from Bloomberg that Chinese officials are casting doubts about the prospects for a long-term trade deal. Would a lack of a long-term deal be a long-term headwind for the U.S. economy?
Well, there's clearly a shift that's taking place in the global production and global manufacturing, and it's not surprising to see that a long-term deal with China would be much more difficult to bring about than a short-term deal. The short-term deal is really done just to handle political near-term requirements for both Xi and Donald Trump. Xi needs to be able to feed his people, to be honest with you, and Donald Trump needs to get the farm states having more positive export growth to pick up his support and shore up his support in that part of the country. So that part of the deal is very, very easy. The longer term part of the deal with regard to intellectual property and the security related issues, those are part of a much more bigger picture going on, which is basically a new Cold War designed to box out China. This is something that, we've been talking about for a while, and I think it's generally becoming more and more present in terms of the marketplace, that people are beginning to realize that we are now looking at China. Everyone is looking at China in a different way. And I think, therefore, the long-term solution to a trade deal is not going to come, certainly not before the election.
Well, if that's the case, I mean, what does that mean for business confidence going forward if, as you term it, we are entering a new trade Cold War?
Well, I think for business, I think a lot of them have already switched their production pipelines. If they haven't, they're well into the process of having it done, completed at this point. And I think that's an important thing. I think what's going to happen is you're setting up new alliances, you're redistributing your logistic channels, and you're getting different markets that you're spending more, investing more time and effort into than you did before. Now, it may wind up raising the underlying costs a little bit, or damaging earnings a little bit because cost factors go up initially, but the reality is we will find alternative places to purchase goods from and to source goods from, and the reason for that is we live in a world of excess supply, and I think that's the driving force between what's really going on in the global economy is excess supply and creating deflation, which is why we're reminded again today by the BOJ that they have to be much more accommodative, and they're going to maintain accommodation on an ongoing basis. Europe is going to be in the same path, and even to an extent yesterday, even though the chair made it quite clear that it's probably through and done, I think the Fed is slowly realizing that they need to use the balance sheet more than interest rates, because in a world where corporate America and household America are leveraged very, very long, the impact of interest rates on cash flows is decidedly smaller, yet the impact of the balance sheet is decidedly greater.
So are you thinking that the Fed is going to more explicitly go back to quantitative easing in this environment?
I think they're politically loath to say they're doing it, but I think over time we're going to see it. The chairman laid out a number yesterday of about 1.45 to 1.5 trillion as to where he thinks the balance sheet gets to. I think they'll eventually go through that, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them broaden out beyond the bill purchases that they're doing, recognizing that the curve is still too flat and that they need to steepen the curve and they need to increase inflation expectations, that they'll move out into the shorter coupons, eventually out to the 3-year note, to bring down the 2 10-year spread. Because if you notice, the big thing that happened yesterday on the back of what the chairman said was the 2-year 10-year spread is actually narrowed, and they need that spread to go in the opposite direction.
Only about a minute left here. Where do you see the trend on payrolls? We've got the payrolls report coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, clearly we've got a ding in this one coming from the GM strike. BLS has said it's probably about 47,000 workers. We've generally been running with an average payroll gain of about 175 per month. So if you take that 47 out of there, we're probably looking at a number in the 120, 130 area. And I think that's healthy enough. As long as we're above 100,000 on an ongoing basis, we have enough to keep the unemployment rate on a slightly downward trajectory.
Stephen Risciuto, thank you for this. That's Stephen Risciuto, Chief U.S. Economist at Mizuho Securities. And again, the breaking news this morning, Chinese officials casting doubts about the possibility of a comprehensive long-term trade deal, warning in private conversations that they won't budge on the thorniest issues and remain concerned about President Trump's impulsive nature and the risk he may back out of even the limited deal both sides say they want to sign in the coming weeks. S&P futures now down 8.5 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak. Good morning.
This is a Bloomberg Market Minute. Stock futures are little changed to lower as investors await a look at corporate layoff announcements, September reports on personal income and spending, and weekly snapshots of jobless claims and consumer comfort. We get earnings today from ADM, Kraft Heinz, Dunkin' Brands, and others. Wall Street is coming off a new all-time high. The Fed announced its third quarter percentage point interest rate cut of the year and signaled it was not likely to move in either direction anytime soon as inflation remains muted. The Dow rose 115 points. Shares of Apple are moving higher before the opening bell. Investors are happy with the company's latest results and its forecast. New iPhones will help Apple return to growth in the key holiday period. Apple projected fiscal first quarter revenue that beat analyst estimates, signaling solid demand for iPhone 11 models and new services like Apple TV Plus. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know, with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President, Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize.
We just got back from a beautiful city break in Bath. Midweek is the perfect time to beat the crowds. Just an hour and a half by train from London. It was so relaxing. We headed straight for Bath Christmas Market. Oh, I can still smell the roasted chestnuts and mulled wine from the chalets. Then it was time for glow-in-the-dark mini-golf. I got a hole-in-one. Well, 3. I'm a bit rusty, okay? There's so much to do in Bath. I'm already planning my next trip.
Discover the magic of Bath this Christmas. Plan ahead at visitbath.co.uk/Christmas.
Just because you travel doesn't mean you can't keep your routine. The more obstacles travel puts between us and our well-being, the more we strive to work well. At Westin Hotels and Resorts, we're focused on empowering your well-being. With Westin Meetings, you work and feel your best with nutritious snacks and nourishing smoothies that give you the energy you need to power through any meeting. Don't leave your well-being behind. We give you the choice to get up or to rise. Search Westin online to find out more. Westin, let's rise.
Why is Lizzie going rental for Fizzy Haze? Is it because her flat is so beautiful and spacious? Snazzy! Or has roof terrace, garden and party room? Surprising! Or because it's 18 minutes to Paddington? Easy! With friendly staff on hand to take any deliveries? Amazing! Or just because her fuzzy friend can live there too? Find your new home at fizzyhaze.com. Fizzy Living, reinventing renting.
It's another Thursday morning, yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick. Experience Mexican culture and relax by the Caribbean Sea. Fly from London Gatwick to Cancun with British Airways from £275 each way based on a return fare. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun with British Airways. Incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
Cold Thursday mornings like this are cruel. You cough, you splutter, so does your car. Its battery dead. Killed by an icy claw. Will anyone stand up to winter? Yes, you. Come to Halfords. We fit new batteries on the spot from just £15. And we're open late 7 days a week. See halfords.com for opening hours. Here in Chiswick. Ready for the cold snap? Ready for anything. Halfords, for life's journeys.
Batteries sold separately. Selected vehicles only in most stores.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
And it's 5:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We're just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are lower as the trade war weighs on sentiment. Sources close to trade negotiations tell us Chinese officials doubt that a long-term deal with the White House is possible. They say Beijing is unlikely to budge on the most contentious issues and remain concerned that President Trump could back out of any agreement.
Well, meanwhile, we did hit a fresh record for the S&P 500 yesterday after the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates again. Traders now see no rate cuts until April, as Chairman Jerome Powell stands pat.
We see the current stance of monetary policy as likely to remain appropriate.
as long as incoming information about the economy remains broadly consistent with our outlook.
And tune in for more insight from the Fed tomorrow when we have an exclusive interview with Richard Clarida. Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow sit down for a conversation with the Fed Vice Chairman at 9:30 a.m. Wall Street time again tomorrow on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Overnight in Asia, the Bank of Japan kept policy unchanged but strengthened its wording on interest rates. That leaves the door open for the possibility of lower rates.
Hong Kong has officially entered a technical recession. Third quarter GDP contracted by 3.2%, coming in far below estimates for a contraction of 0.6%.
In Europe, Fiat, Chrysler, and Peugeot are moving forward with a merger. The automakers have agreed to work toward a full 50-50 combination with a binding agreement likely in the coming weeks.
On the earnings front, shares of Facebook are up nearly 5% in early trading after results that beat projections. We get details now from Kurt Wagner in the Bloomberg 960 San Francisco newsroom.
Facebook added 35 million users to its main platform for the quarter. Ad sales reached $17.7 billion. That broke the record for the highest ever sales result for any single quarter for Facebook. That growth is likely to have come from ads inside its Instagram photo sharing app. However, Facebook keeps those exact numbers close to its chest. In San Francisco, I'm Kurt Wagner, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Kurt, thank you. And shares of Apple are up 1.5% in early trading after earnings topped estimates, and its holiday forecast came in ahead of projections. Here with more is Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
It signals solid demand for the latest iPhones, new services like Apple TV Plus, and wearables such as upgraded AirPods and Apple Watch. The forecast suggests Apple is seeing strong demand for the iPhone 11 and iPhone 11 Pro models that went on sale in September, and it suggests Apple will return to growth after missing sales targets in last year's holiday period. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Charlie, thank you. S&P futures down about 11 points. Dow futures down 90. NASDAQ futures down at 20. And the euro 1.1169 against the dollar. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news. And this is Bloomberg.
All right, thanks, Karen. It's 5:33 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Thank you very much, Nathan. House Democrats and Republicans are rounding up votes on the proposed ground rules for considering the impeachment of President Trump. A near party line vote is expected today on the 8 pages of procedures in the Democratic-controlled House. Meanwhile, House investigators expect to hear next from the man who, until recently, was President Trump's top advisor for Russian and European affairs. Tim Morrison had been with the National Security Council until leaving his post the day before today's scheduled testimony in the House impeachment inquiry. Connecticut Congressman Jim Hines, who sits on the House Intelligence Committee, says testimony so far is pointing to what has become as the quid pro quo when it comes to aid for the Ukraine.
Many of the witnesses, and I say this based on the opening statements that have been made public, have certainly pointed in the direction of the notion that military aid, a meeting in the White House, were held up as a way of exerting leverage on the new president of Ukraine. That is a very serious issue.
Former National Security Advisor John Bolton is not agreeing to a voluntary interview with the impeachment inquiry against President Trump, saying he will not appear without a subpoena. Twitter's CEO Jack Dorsey announced that the company has decided to stop all political advertising on Twitter globally. The move comes after Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg came under fire for saying Facebook won't take down false or misleading political ads. President Trump's re-election campaign chose the final game of the World Series to broadcast a new ad. The commercial narrator says he's no Mr. Nice Guy, but sometimes it takes a Donald Trump to change Washington. Kamala Harris plans to cut staff and restructure her presidential effort. Her campaign is failing to catch on with Democratic voters, and she remains locked out of the top tier of candidates. Santa Ana winds are expected to linger for a final day after driving more than a dozen wildfires through California. There is some good news. The Kincaid fire that has destroyed hundreds of structures in the Bay Area in Sonoma County is now 45% contained. Cal Fire spokesperson Jonathan Cox.
There's a lot of optimism that we have turned the corner for the better on this fire, and I think that is indicative of the fact that a lot of evacuation orders and warnings were lifted this afternoon.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. 5:35 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update. Here's John Stashauer.
Nathan, what an amazing run by the Washington Nationals, a franchise that had been known for playoff disappointments. They won that one-game wild card playoff after trailing by 2 runs in the 8th inning. They beat the Dodgers in a decisive game after trailing by 2 in the 8th. And last night, World Series Game 7 in Houston, the Nats down 2. In the 7th, Anthony Rendon homered, and 2 batters later.
Pitch. Swinging a line drive, slice down the right field line toward the corner. Springer back, looking up, and this one is gone. It hits the foul pole, and the Nationals lead. Howie Kendrick has done it again. A slicing 2-run homer off the right field foul pole. Do you believe it, Howie Kendrick? Part 2.
Nationals radio the call. It was Kendrick who won that game in L.A. with a grand slam. He was also NLCS MVP. Nationals had only 1 hit in the first 6 innings off Zach Greinke, but 6 runs on 8 hits over the last 3. Another comeback win. 6-2 in Houston, ending a World Series where the road team won every game. Steven Strasburg won games 2 and 6, named series MVP. Is expected to opt out, will command a big new contract. Rendon will be a free agent as well, as will Astros ace Garrett Cole, who in a surprise never got into the game last night. And the Astros, who are heavily favored in the series, will also think about stranding 9 runners over the first 5 innings. Low-scoring game in Orlando. The Magic beat the Knicks 95-83. Knicks only had 16 points in the fourth quarter. In Brooklyn, Indiana's first win of the year beat the Nets 118-108. Not the same Warriors team, and now Steph Curry's got a broken hand. Golden State lost at home to Phoenix. Houston 159, Washington 158. James Harden scored 59. Devils lost in overtime to Tampa Bay 7-6. With the Bloomberg NBC Sports Update, I'm John Stashauer. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. 5:37 on Wall Street. The latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is on newsstands now. It's the special Year Ahead issue, including a look at why President Trump's scariest political opponent is a recession. Joshua Green wrote the story for Bloomberg Business Week.
What he needs to worry about is the fact that the economy, by most forecasts, is trending in the wrong direction. And in particular, manufacturing is trending in the wrong direction. And in a recession, that is key in the group of swing states in the upper Midwest that are probably going to decide the next election.
And you can read more about this and other stories in the Year Ahead edition of Bloomberg Business Week on newsstands now and online at businessweek.com. Terminal customers can subscribe at MAG Go and listen to Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly weekdays at 2 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. 5:38 on Wall Street, and that's time for the Tri-State Business Report with Bloomberg's Ed Corey. Good morning, Ed.
Morning, Nathan. A bankruptcy court judge in Poughkeepsie is expected to rule today on the fate of Barney's New York. If the $271 million bid from Authentic Brands and B. Riley is approved, the result could be liquidation sales of luxury goods like handbags and dresses at all 7 Barney's locations. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy says the state has a memorandum of understanding to build a new train station in North Brunswick between Princeton and New Brunswick. The project has a $20 million funding commitment from the Middlesex County Improvement Authority. Another $50 million will be coming from the state. Well, the empty site of an old Toys R Us in Queens is now home to Zombies Are Back, a Halloween event with a $27 admission. The event illustrates how a glut of unused space is demanding landlords get more creative than ever. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey. Nathan?
Thank you, Ed. It's 5:39 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Andrew O'Day on WBZ in Boston. I'm reporting on blank check company Diamond Eagle acquisition in talks to buy Boston's DraftKings.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and on WBBM in Chicago, we're watching for earnings from Archer Daniels Midland.
I'm Courtney Donahoe on WHAS in Louisville. Ford has reached a tentative agreement with the United Auto Workers, likely avoiding a strike.
I'm Tom Busby, and on WIOD in Miami, I'm reporting on the Broward Health System of South Florida becoming the latest group to pull its money out of Fisher Investments after lewd comments by the money manager.
I'm Steve Potisk, and on KYW in Philadelphia, we're reporting on quarterly results from Arm & Hammer maker Church & Dwight.
And those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. And we do have more corporate earnings on the way today. We get results from more than 40 companies in the S&P 500 on this Halloween, including Cigna, Kraft Heinz, and Altria. Bloomberg customers can check the earnings calendar on the terminal. Just type ACDR go. On the latest U.S.-China trade headlines, futures on Wall Street are pointing to a lower open now. S&P futures are down 9 points. Dow futures down 75, and NASDAQ futures are lower by 15 points. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the...
It's another Thursday morning, yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick to enjoy a warm Bayesian welcome.
How are you doing? Enjoying the sunshine?
Fly from London Gatwick to Barbados with British Airways, with flights and 7 nights hotel from just £699 per person. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun with British Airways. Incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, work from home on a Friday jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, Soho jobs, Shoreditch jobs. Keep me away from the central line jobs. Banking jobs, building jobs, never ever boring jobs. Small jobs, big jobs, lunch in Borough Market jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
London, switch to Vodafone, the UK's best mobile network, and be unlimited, because the best phones deserve the best network and our new unlimited data plans. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Max download speeds apply to unlimited data. Best network as voted by readers of trusted reviews. Terms at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
Hey, it's me again, the TV. Since my family gave me Now TV, there's no more endlessly searching for something they want to watch, because now I don't do filler TV, just killer TV. If my family want movies, I've got blockbusters. Or crime dramas, I've got loads. And they're never going to guess who did it. Or how about reality TV? I can fill that island-shaped hole. Now they can watch whatever they're in the mood for.
What's your TV got for you tonight? Now TV. 18 plus. Month passes auto renew. Terms apply.
Watford. On chilly days like today, forgetting to turn the heating off is easily done, especially when you're already running late for work. But it's nice to know with Hive Active Heating, a Which Best Buy, you can turn your heating off from wherever you are, even when you're mid-sprint on the station platform. And by never having to heat an empty home, you could save up to £120 a year on your heating bill. Search Hive Heating to buy now. Hive services require broadband and Wi-Fi. Terms apply.
News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a Global News Update.
House lawmakers consider ground rules for the impeachment of President Trump. A near party-line vote is expected today on the 8 pages of procedures. The Washington Nationals defeat the Houston Astros 6-2 in Game 7 of the World Series. Nats pitcher Max Scherzer.
The energy, the camaraderie, the belief in one another, it doesn't matter. Everybody just believes in each other.
A fire warning from Mark Ghilarducci of the California Governor's Office.
If told to evacuate, don't wait, do it.
Fierce Santa Ana winds continue again today. Chicago's Mayor Lori Lightfoot holds the line on bargaining with striking teachers.
I'm not compensating them for days that they were out on strike. I was very clear about that from day one.
That sticking point, part of a tentative deal on the table for teachers. South Korea's military says North Korea has launched another projectile toward its eastern sea. I'm John Trout.
If you're at the top of your profession, you're listening.
Are those gains all going to the elite?
Bloomberg Surveillance.
Does it spread beyond manufacturing?
Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell. Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Futures turning lower this morning after Chinese officials cast doubts about reaching a comprehensive long-term trade deal with the U.S. Right now, S&P futures are down 12 points, Dow futures down 104, NASDAQ futures down 25, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. The DAX in Germany is down 0.8%. 10-year Treasury up 9/30 seconds, yield 1.73%. The yield on the 2-year 1.59%. NYMEX crude oil is little changed at $55.03 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.7%, up $11.10 at $15.0780 an ounce. The euro 1.1163 against the dollar. The British pound 1.2934, and the yen is at 108.32. And today we're looking for the weekly report on initial jobless claims at 8:30 Wall Street time, along with personal income and spending. And the Bloomberg Consumer Comfort Index is out at 945. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, the House plans to vote today on an impeachment resolution that will lay out the next steps in the impeachment process. It will be the first vote the full House has taken on the impeachment inquiry since Democratic leaders launched the probe related to an intelligence community whistleblower complaint. Washington Nationals fans have been celebrating after beating the Houston Astros to win the World Series. The Nationals won the deciding Game 7, 6-2. In the NBA, the Knicks and Nets lost. The Celtics won. And the Rockets against the Wizards, they were handing out points like it was Halloween candy. Houston won 159-158 in regulation. The Warriors lost, and even worse, Steph Curry broke his left hand and will be out indefinitely. In the NHL, the Devils lost. Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thanks. It's coming up to 5:49 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak, and we want to get more on our top story now. U.S. futures taking a hit this hour as the trade war weighs on sentiment. Sources close to trade negotiations tell us Chinese officials doubt that a long-term deal with the U.S. is possible. For more details, we're joined from London by Brendan Murray, who is in charge of all things trade at Bloomberg News. Brendan, good morning. What are Chinese officials saying exactly, and is it much different from what they've been saying up to now?
Well, we're going to hear a lot in the next couple of weeks about this so-called Phase 1 deal that the U.S. and China say they expect they'll be able to sign. But what this reporting shows today is that basically it's going to be one and done. That the Chinese are not interested in addressing the broader sort of structural issues with its economy that the U.S. is pressing for. So where that leaves us is a trade war that just kind of goes on until the other side caves, and neither one is willing to do so at this point.
Yeah, I just spoke with Stephen Risciuto of Mizuho, who is terming this a new trade Cold War, and one that in many ways the business community has already adjusted to. So where does this leave things now if we are headed toward this sort of long-term impasse between the world's two largest economies?
It leaves both sides with their key demand on the table. China wants the U.S. to roll back the tariffs that are already in place, and the U.S. wants China to move more toward a market-led economy. And neither one of those sides appear willing to give those things. So, what it means is we could see the economies of both countries. The U.S. is grinding lower to a 2% sort of rate, and China just recently reached a 6% rate, which is pretty slow for its past couple of decades. So we could just continue to see this sluggish, kind of growth that we've seen both economies decelerate to going on indefinitely, as long as these trade war weapons that both sides are pointing at each other continue to be part of the picture.
And of course, we saw yesterday the Phase 1 trade deal, at least it getting over the finish line, thrown into doubt now that the APEC summit in Chile is canceled. In this atmosphere of a potential long-term trade impasse, does that put this Phase 1 deal into doubt now?
It definitely puts the timing of the Phase 1 deal and the location of it. They don't have a location for Presidents Trump and Xi to get together and sign Phase 1. So we're still waiting to find out if that means they're going to wait a couple months and meet somewhere else, neutral territory perhaps. But both sides are pretty confident that Phase 1, which is really just the superficial stuff, can get done. But beyond that, as our reporting shows today, there's really little appetite on either side to go much further.
Yeah, and in terms of that, I mean, where could we potentially see cracks in some of those long-term sticking points, things like the tariffs? Is there a possibility that the U.S. might make some concessions on tariffs that could lead the Chinese to budge in some way on their end?
The one pressure point that's really weighing on Donald Trump and the U.S. economy generally is that business investment is really being hurt by all the uncertainty that tariffs have created. We've had a couple consecutive quarters of capital spending declining. Some of the economic numbers showed us this week. The consumer, meanwhile, is staying pretty strong. So if we continue to see that businesses are continuing to delay investments, and that continues to weigh on the economy, that could become a point where Donald Trump decides, you know what, let's get back to the table and try to offer some concessions.
And in our last minute here, are we hearing any discussion on these longer-term issues, the structural changes that the U.S. is looking for? Are those actually being discussed? I mean, we hear that Chinese officials are discussing among themselves that they're not willing to budge, but are those issues on the table right now?
They're not on the table for Phase 1, and what we're reporting today is that China isn't interested in them even in a Phase 2 unless the U.S. rolls back tariffs. So the longer-term stuff is really being pushed out into the future, and whether we get to those, it's increasingly looking unlikely that those will ever come, or in the next year or so, say, that those are ever going to happen.
Bloomberg's Brendan Murray with an important scoop on our trade team this morning. Brendan, thank you. Brendan Murray is in charge of all things trade for Bloomberg News. He joined us from London. Thank you. Karen.
And thank you. It is 5:54 on Wall Street. It's time for the Bloomberg Law Report, brought to you by American Arbitration Association. International trade or business dispute resolved faster with the International Center for Dispute Resolution, the leader in alternative dispute resolution around the world, ICDR.org. Let's get to the legal stories we're watching this morning with Steve Potisk in the Bloomberg 99.1 Washington newsroom.
A bipartisan bill working through Congress called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would give thousands of undocumented agricultural workers in the U.S. a path to legal status in exchange for a stronger employee verification process. Environmental groups are suing the Trump administration over the Bureau of Land Management allowing oil and gas development on more than 700,000 acres of public lands in California. And Michigan is one step closer to legalizing sports betting. A bill passed in the Republican-led state House now heads to the Senate, which is considering its own sportsbook legislation.
Bloomberg Law. Everything you need on one legal research platform. Guidance, analysis, and Bloomberg Market Intelligence. Find out more at BloombergLaw.com.
And now another legal story we're watching. Former ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson called to the stand yesterday in New York's landmark lawsuit against the oil company. The state's attorney general claims Tillerson spearheaded a secret scheme to defraud investors by lying about how the oil company planned for the financial risks of climate change. For more on the testimony, Bloomberg's June Grasso speaks with Pat Barrento, an environmental law professor at Vermont Law School.
Rex Tillerson, obviously the star witness. How important is his testimony?
I think his testimony is very important. He was the CEO of Exxon during the critical period of time that the New York AG is alleging that Exxon came up with these two different bookkeeping methods on proxy costs for carbon. And he's the one who went to the shareholders meeting in 2016 to reassure investors that Exxon was using the sort of state-of-the-art accounting for carbon risks. And so his testimony is critical.
And is he basically holding to the company line, what the defense attorneys have been arguing?
Yes, he is. He's saying we used two different proxy costs, and we did so for different purposes, and we didn't mislead our investors in any way. That's exactly what you would have expected him to say. We have this whole question of what happened to all the emails under the pseudonym that he was using, Wayne Tracker, and those emails have, quote, disappeared. And there's lots of questions about what was in them. Were references to these proxy costs discussed? Was climate change risks discussed? Why were they destroyed? And so forth.
Judge Barry Ostrager, New York State Supreme Court judge, is presiding over the case. Why a judge instead of a jury?
That was up to Exxon. They could have demanded a jury trial. They opted for a bench trial. I think it's fair to infer that Exxon feared having a case like this tried before a jury of ordinary citizens. Some of the documents and statements that are coming out in the trial look pretty damning. Certainly to the average person, it looks like, at a minimum, Exxon was sloppy and confusing with the kinds of information they were using, and perhaps even worse, were deliberately deceiving people. Now, the Martin Act doesn't require proof of actual intent to defraud investors. It just means that the way that you handled the information confused and misled investors, that's enough, as long as it causes material harm to the investors, meaning if they had this information, they could have made better decisions about where to invest their money.
Vermont Law School's Pat Barrento speaking with Bloomberg's June Grasso.
It's another Thursday morning, yet another cold day. So ditch the British winter and chase the sun across the globe with British Airways from London Gatwick and explore tropical rainforests. Fly from London Gatwick to Costa Rica with British Airways from £218 each way based on a return fare. Don't miss out. Book by November the 12th at ba.com/wintersun. With British Airways, incredible is within reach. Booking fees and conditions may apply. Limited availability. Selected flights in March.
I've always loved a kitchen experiment, especially smoothies. I've blended all sorts of mad combinations. Strawberry and charcoal, broccoli and chocolate. Not my best, that. But when I test blenders in the Witch Lab, it's not about flavour, it's about performance. Our tests use proper tough stuff, hard ice, strong veg, rough nuts. And the blenders that can hack it are the only ones we recommend for your kitchen.
Which tests harder so you can buy smarter. Visit which.co.uk.
London, switch to Vodafone, the UK's best mobile network, and Be Unlimited, because the best phones deserve the best network and our new unlimited data plans. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone.
Max download speeds apply to unlimited data. Best network as voted by readers of trusted reviews. Terms at vodafone.co.uk/unlimited.
Look at that. A riveting quest. A glorious opportunity. A scratch card. Yet he remains unfazed by the challenge, wavering at nothing.
Miss, please keep it down. We're in the quiet area.
Sorry. Here we are. The moment of truth as he reaches the end of...
Instant excitement with scratch cards from the National Lottery. Amazing starts here. Search Dream Big, Play Small. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
World 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Thursday, October 31st, 2019. Coming up this hour.
U.S. futures fall as China doubts it can strike a trade deal with the White House.
The Fed cuts rates again, but signals no future move in either direction.
In Europe, Peugeot and Fiat move closer to a merger.
And tech earnings come in strong with beats from Facebook, Apple, and Samsung.
The House votes today on the resolution in the Trump impeachment process. Plus, ex-National Security Advisor John Bolton is asked to testify before the House. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. The Washington Nationals World Series champs. They won Game 7 in Houston. The Knicks, Nets, and Devils all lost.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York. Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 106.1 Boston. Bloomberg 960 San Francisco. Sirius XM 119. And around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Inovalon, a leading provider of cloud-based platforms empowering data-driven healthcare for insurance companies, physicians, pharmacy, and pharmaceutical companies. Inovalon, data has a story to tell. Inovalon gives it a voice.
And futures are lower in just the past hour following news on the U.S.-China trade war. We get more on that in a moment. But first, 6:01 on Wall Street. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 11 points. Dow futures down 98. NASDAQ futures down 21. The DAX in Germany's down 0.6%. So is the CAC in Paris. FTSE 100 down 1%. Nikkei 225 in Japan gained 1/3%. And the Hang Seng in Hong Kong was up 0.9%. 10-year Treasury up 9/30 seconds. Yield 1.73%. Yield on the 2-year 1.58%. NYMEX crude oil down 0.3% or 16 cents at $54.90 a barrel. COMEX gold up 0.7% or $11.10 at $15.0780 an ounce. The euro 1.1171 against the dollar. The yen 108.29. Nathan.
Karen, as you mentioned, the U.S.-China trade war is weighing on sentiment this morning. Bloomberg News has learned Chinese officials are downplaying prospects that any long-term trade agreement with the U.S. can come to fruition. Here with the very latest is Bloomberg's Emma O'Brien in Beijing. Good morning, Emma.
Good morning, Nathan. China has doubts it will ever reach a long-term trade deal with President Trump, with officials in Beijing concerned about his impulsive nature and the risk he'll back out of an agreement. People familiar with the matter say Chinese officials have low expectations that future talks will result in anything meaningful. That is, unless Trump is willing to roll back more of the tariffs he's slapped on China. The cancellation of the APEC summit in Chile is also complicating matters, with the U.S. and China on track to have signed a Phase 1 deal there. In Beijing, Emma O'Brien, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Emma, thank you. Well, U.S. futures are lower on that news. The S&P 500 closed at a record after the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates for the third time this year. Traders now see no additional rate cuts until April. Chairman Jerome Powell won't say it, but seems to think he's achieved a rare soft landing.
The policy adjustments we've made since last year are providing and will continue to provide meaningful support to the economy. We believe that monetary policy is in a good place.
Still, the Fed has little leeway here, and markets could force their hand before April. That's according to Guggenheim Chief Investment Officer Scott Minerd.
At some point, the market has to get confident that these 3 rate cuts are enough, and it is 1995, it is 1998, it is 1987, that this is enough medicine to solve the problem. So I think they have a short-lived window here before the market forces them to do something again.
And to that end, Grant Thornton chief economist Diane Swong sees the Fed cutting rates again soon if there's no resolution to the U.S.-China trade war.
A year ago at this time, the Fed was looking at raising rates through 2019, and they had to reverse course. I think we still got more rate cuts in 2020.
And right now, Fed funds futures imply a 55% chance of a rate cut in April. Bloomberg customers can see the data by typing WIRP GO on the terminal.
And we want to let you know that you should stay tuned for an exclusive interview with Richard Clarida tomorrow. Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrow sit down for a conversation with the Fed Vice Chairman at 9:30 a.m. Wall Street time, 2 days after the Fed decision and just an hour before the October jobs report. Again, catch that tomorrow morning on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Overnight in Asia, the Bank of Japan kept policy unchanged, but strengthened its wording on interest rates. That leaves the door open for lower rates. The BOJ also dropped its time frame for, quote, keeping rates extremely low until at least spring of next year.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong has officially entered a technical recession with third quarter GDP contracting by 3.2%. After nearly 5 months of violent protests, a contraction was expected, but the reading came in far below estimates of minus 0.6%.
In Europe, Fiat Chrysler and Peugeot are moving forward with a merger. The automakers have agreed to work toward a 50-50 combination that would have John Elkann of Fiat as chairman and Carlos Tavares of Peugeot as CEO. And here with more from Milan is Bloomberg's Tommaso Ebhardt.
Peugeot is the best performer in Europe, and Fiat has a big issue with this business in Europe. Fiat is bringing to the table its US